everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and I'm going solo for the moment to introduce our special bonus episode. Now, for those of you who are listening, we're pretty sure 99.9% of you are BCBAs or are studying to be a BCBA or a BCBAD. And we are pretty sure that even though we all know that behavior analysis can be used to solve every single problem that there ever was, a vast majority of us and a vast majority of you got into this field to work with children, young adults, and adults with autism. And of course, one of the big changes that has allowed ABA to become such a commonly known treatment for autism has been so much insurance reform happening in the past 5 to 8 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, in this country, at least in America. And one of the people here in Massachusetts, where we are located, who has been instrumental in this change is Amy Weinstock. Now, Amy is certainly not the only individual responsible for all of the amazing changes that have happened for insurance reform in the state of Massachusetts, but she is certainly one of the more well-known and really influential folks. She's currently the director of the Autism Insurance Resource Center, and we had the chance to sit down and talk with her about insurance and the process of changing the insurance laws, and then sort of what insurance in Massachusetts related to autism treatment kind of means to the average practitioner. So we really hope you enjoy this interview with Amy Weinstock. Well, again, Amy, thank you so much for being on the show. It's really great to have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
So my first question is sort of just a standard one. Some of our listeners aren't from Massachusetts and may not be familiar with your work. So how did you get to become the big insurance guru here in Massachusetts?
It was sort of a bad accident. I came to this as a consumer. I have a daughter who is 20, who was diagnosed with autism about 18 years ago. I had no reference, no connection with autism or the field or anything, and we quickly, very fortunately, learned about ABA and were incredibly fortunate because it was much less available 18 years ago to get some great ABA through early intervention, and we saw the difference it made in her life. And then when she turned 3, we were sent to our local school district, and they said they did ABA, and it looked sort of like ABA, but wasn't exactly the stuff I was reading, and it was nowhere near the intensity. And we really struggled to just figure out, how do you get this? And in the back of my mind, I remember so vividly one of the caseworkers from early intervention said to us, of all the families I deal with, autism is so much more stressful, and I have kids on my caseload with life-threatening diseases and terminal diseases, but there's a treatment protocol, and you follow it, and you say your prayers, and the chips fall where you may. And I thought, well, no kidding, lady, no one's telling us what the protocol is. No one's giving us certainly a prognosis, a cause, certainly not a cure. And with those other ones, your insurance is giving you access to the intensive treatment that lets you maybe sleep a little better at night knowing you're doing everything you can. And we were just thrashing. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, every 6 months there's another How I Fixed My Kid in 30 Days book and other things that were coming out. So the lack of insurance coverage just always sort of stuck with me. And I didn't kind of set out to do anything about it because I was just trying to keep my life together. But I was working in banking at the time, in finance and risk management. Mm-hmm. And about 3 years later, I decided I wanted to leave the workforce to pursue that work-life balance and have more time with my kid, which for anybody who's listening, the work-life balance is a total myth. But I decided I wanted to try to apply my professional skills to this personal issue and see if I couldn't figure out, why insurance didn't cover this. I understood why they didn't want to pay for it, but what we could do about it. And so I left banking. I did a 1-year fellowship at UMass Medical in a program they have called Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, where I learned about health policy and systems and advocacy and all the knowledge pieces I didn't have. And then I did a thesis capstone project that essentially became the blueprint for a law that we passed in Massachusetts 5 years later that required private insurance to cover autism treatment.
Wow. Even back then you had that blueprint going. That's amazing.
Well, I had the blueprint. I didn't necessarily envision it becoming a law, but through some of the work that Autism Speaks was doing nationally, a group of us decided about 2008 that we really wanted to pursue this. But we used that as the framework. And then shortly after the law passed, I'd like to say before the ink dried, we realized we had this great law, but for people to actually access the treatment was just going to take a lot of information, resources, and assistance that really was beyond what we could sort of do as a band of, great volunteers. And that's when the Autism Insurance Resource Center was created back at UMass Medical School Shriver Center, where I had done that Lend Fellowship. So it kind of came full circle.
That's great.
And we've been busy ever since.
I can imagine. So what was sort of the process of just learning about everything and then bringing it to the government and getting them to enact the changes in the law related to insurance?
Oh my. You'll really have to wait for the movie version. But I came across a quote when I was doing my research for my project from Robert Jarvik, the inventor of the artificial heart. Mm-hmm. And he had this quote that said, "Leaders are visionaries with a poorly developed sense of fear and no concept of the odds against them." I didn't really think about that until we were pretty close to getting the law passed, but that really governed us. I mean, we were a really dedicated group of mostly parents, but many of us bringing, incredible professional skills and resources to the table. Mm-hmm. We did it all as volunteers. And, we knew that the insurance industry and the business interests that in every state, across the country just oppose mandates and oppose these kinds of laws mm-hmm. was well-funded and not in favor of this, but we just persevered because we knew that our kids needed it and it was just critical. And the guiding principle was pretty simple, which was, if our children had cancer, insurance would cover chemo, and there was no reason that autism should be treated differently. I think there's a historical bias because decades ago, autism was believed to be this untreatable mental condition caused by refrigerator mothers. Yeah. The science had come so far, the research has come so far, there's effective treatment, but insurance was still, no, that's something we don't deal with. And so mm-hmm. we just felt like we needed to change the system, and we kept it really simple. We had no budget to speak of. We pooled our money for like beer and pizza when we needed it, but we got these little stickers printed, and I'm looking at one of them right now in my little office bulletin board they were 2 inches by 2 inches, and we used the font from Got Milk, and we got insurance, not if you have autism.
Ooh,
and
that's good.
We just kept it simple and persevered relentlessly, and a lot of amazing things happened that we were very fortunate for everything that really came together in Massachusetts that got our law passed, relatively quickly. Laws get filed like every session, and we mm-hmm. were told a law like this would take several sessions to get passed. It got passed the first session.
Wow.
And it was really, comprehensive coverage. And I don't want to say it was a gift. I think it was a right, but mm-hmm. I feel like it was an opportunity to make sure that once we had this law that people could actually really get the treatment that was intended under it. And so I feel just so privileged to have had the ringside seat to watch all of that play out and work on that.
Was there ever a sense that insurance companies might just, I know no insurance company is going to make a change in their policies just because it's actually, for the betterment of society, but was there ever a sense that maybe market forces were sort of going to push them to say, this is a good idea, we should do this, or did you know pretty early on it was going to be a law or nothing?
There were certainly alternatives to a law. So when I did my research in 2005, I had a number of alternatives, which included just straight advocacy without legislation. Mm-hmm. Potentially there's comparable kinds of cases. Sometimes there's a history of litigation that results in changing access and treatment or whatever. So there's definitely other ways to do it. Like I said, in 2007, Autism Speaks started working with states around the country to pass these laws. And part of our success here in Massachusetts was due to the momentum that was created across the country with a wave of these laws passed. So in 2005, when I started working on this issue, there was one state in the whole country that had a law requiring insurance to cover treatment. And by 2010, when our law passed, we were the 23rd state. There's currently 47 states. So we were part of that wave that was sweeping across the country. So it certainly wasn't the only way to change it. And had we not been successful, had this movement not been successful, I think you would have seen plans B, C, and D evolve. But the route that we went.
Yeah, I'm guessing those would have been a lot slower and not necessarily as comprehensive as many of the laws that are currently on the books right now.
Well, I liken this to the education laws. And so the law IDEA was passed decades ago, and what children get in school today and can still be very variable and very challenging is vastly different than what they were able to access in the first few years after the laws passed. So, I'm not a patient person, but this kind of systemic change really does take time, and it takes persistence, and it takes tenacity. And we have all of that, but I think there's a little bit of luck sometimes too, which I feel we've had in our case.
I try to keep up with, I have Google alerts for a lot of topics related to ABA, so including autism. And I know some states, it seems like there are stories every other week about how the insurance companies aren't really funding some of the mandates, or they're only providing services for certain aspects of treatment. Are there pieces of the Massachusetts laws regarding insurance that are better than other states, or has it been similar from state to state?
Well, I like to think of insurance reform as our process a little bit like a triathlon, and the first leg, and that was actually something that Judith Orsitti from Autism Speaks, who we partnered with closely, told me. The legislation was like the first leg of the triathlon. Implementation is the second leg, and then enforcement is the third leg. And so depending on the state that you're in and the phase that you're in, there can be different efforts and different barriers and challenges. So think of each kind of state as an athlete. And the laws that were passed across the country are relatively similar in their structure, but each one is different. And many of them have limitations on types of coverage, or many of them were passed with age caps. In some cases, there were dollar limits. And then in the implementation, and the devil is in the details, there were different regs adopted in different states. And in some states, those regs were very, very restrictive to the point where it made it really impossible for almost any provider or family to sort of meet the requirements that would require the insurance to fund it. In some cases, it took repeated trips back to the legislature or litigation or threatened litigation to move those regs and get them to where they needed to get to. And then the last phase is, even with a strong law and good regs and supportive regulators and legislators, even here in Massachusetts, in 2014, the Attorney General entered into a settlement with one carrier who had medical necessity guidelines that precluded access and made it really difficult. And they had to change those medical necessity guidelines and pay a fine. And it helped resolve some barriers, but it was even, really challenging here.
Did you find the process of working with the Massachusetts legislature to be relatively smooth, or was there a lot of pushback from folks in particular? I just always imagine Massachusetts legislature as being kind of a tough place to be, just at least historically in the state.
Well, passing a law is a tough thing. I think, as I said, we had tremendous leadership in Massachusetts. In every law, you have a kind of lead sponsor in your House and your Senate, and our lead sponsor in the Senate was Senator Fred Berry. He's retired now, but he himself has a disability that he grew up with, and he understood how much access to treatment meant, and had personally lived with a lot of disparities. And then in the House, our lead legislator was Representative Barbara L'Italian, who's now a state senator, who is the parent of a child with, a young adult with autism now. And so she just understood this inherently and having that knowledge base. And she, over the course of her terms in the legislature, had educated all her colleagues. So there was an awareness about autism and an understanding about autism, and an infrastructure of leadership there that laid a foundation. It was still very, very difficult, but we had that. So, out of the gate, when you file legislation for a law, you have to get co-sponsors, and there's about 200 legislators. And there's not a typical bill, but if a bill has 20 or 30 co-sponsors, that's something that the legislature takes notice of. But we organized parents from day one and members of the community to all go to their legislators. So we had 110 legislators co-sponsor this bill from the beginning. So it got noticed early on, and we just kept up that pressure. And when it passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate. So I won't say it was easy, but we just had groundswell of support from both, the grassroots from the bottom up and strong leadership from the top down. And I think that came together with a few other, key players and leadership working to make sure this happened.
That's great. It sounds like just a lot of everything falling into place at the right time. That's excellent. As the director of the Autism Insurance Resource Center, I'm sure you spend a lot of your day doing many, director roles, but you probably also spend a lot of the day answering questions for families. Is that still the case, or less so now, just with, the organization having so many things to do?
Given my druthers, I'd spend all my time doing that. So I do have a lot of responsibilities, but I think coming from this as a parent and knowing what it's like to be on the other side, we're very committed to that. So I do spend a part of that day, and we have a reputation for being really responsive. So I'm not always in my office all day, but we all have little devices, and at the end of a day and certainly a week, if there's a parent that needs help that hasn't been responded to, we get back to them one way or another. So yes, I do that, and I enjoy that, and it's important. It keeps it real because people are, despite all this great success and people are still struggling. It is not easy.
No.
And we have a lot of work that we still need to do. So.
What would you say are some of the more common questions that you get from families, on a given day about insurance, about maybe about treatment?
I'd say they fall into three categories. The biggest question is still paying for it, and the thing that we haven't talked about is when this law was passed in 2010. That was just a law requiring private insurance to cover treatment, and very quickly it became the disparity between private and public with our Mass Health program, which is our state's Medicaid, became apparent. So in 2015, our Medicaid plan, Mass Health, began covering ABA, which was huge. And so a lot of our time is just helping people figure out how to pay for it, because for many people, either they're accessing it through Mass Health, or if they're accessing it through private insurance, they're using Mass Health as secondary coverage to help with some of the co-insurance and the co-pays, because even with insurance, this is not cheap. If you have co-pays and you have an ABA program with, say, 20 hours a week and multiple sessions, just the co-pays alone can be more than many families can manage. And we saw people before Medicaid was covering this rationing treatment and things that just are heartbreaking because we worked so hard. If you're a family and you're trying to access Mass Health and you don't have it, we help a lot of people understand how they can do that. We help them sometimes with the details of enrolling in it, or some of the problems that just come when you have the complexities of, primary insurance and secondary insurance. The other issues we get, we work a lot with the provider community, because behavior analysts didn't go to school to learn how to work with insurance-provided services. And so that's been a learning curve and an experience that has been required skill sets and resources and challenges. So
Yeah.
we work a lot with providers. And the other real issue that we see is because there's been such a great expansion of access to coverage for treatment, the demand has skyrocketed. The supply of behavioral analysts has increased, but not nearly as quickly as the demand has. So that, I think, is going to abate over time. But a lot of the questions we get is, how do we find a provider? How do we deal with what are incredibly long wait lists? And one of the things that I worry a lot about is with that supply and demand imbalance and rapid expansion, how do you not ensure, but ensure quality and make sure that the treatment that's being delivered is the high quality treatment that's necessary?
No, well, that's definitely a concern. I know, among all the, behavior analysts that I work with, because I learned everything I learned. I worked at, private school for many, many years with, a lot of the, big names in the field. And I feel like I sort of hit that great cusp where behavior analysis was just starting to really become a known quantity. I was maybe a little bit at the end of that tail. And I know I got so much training on how to be a behavior analyst, not just how to deal with problems as they come up. And just the amount of people who are trained nowadays, I don't know how to keep up with the demand, because so many of the people that I knew, and we've only been doing this for, a little over 10 years, is now, okay, well, now you have to train all the people coming up. And it just feels like the amount of need is way outstripping the ability to just generate that quality of service that we want to keep providing to everybody. And it is a real challenge, but we want to get people out there too, but we don't have to be crummy services that people are providing.
Yeah. And, I've never met a more committed profession than behavior analysts. And when you're a behavior analyst and you have families that are just desperate for this treatment and the potential, the inclination to stretch yourself and overstretch is just natural. These forces are just pulling everybody in so many directions.
We recently did a fundraiser for a school in Ghana where there's one BCBA in all of Western Africa. And, you think about, oh, wow, that's got to be where the need is. And you think, well, no, Massachusetts, which has the most BCBAs in the world, I think, still, I have family. Yeah, I have families, and, I don't even hear insurance questions all the time in my line of work, but I have families just I couldn't get a provider. They said it's going to be 4 to 6 months. So even when they have the insurance that is able to pay for the service, it still seems like we're still so far from being able to hit that sweet spot for supply and demand.
Yes. And there are many families with cultural, linguistic, or geographic challenges that make it even harder. So for a family that's on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard, I don't want to say they may as well be in Ghana, but there are not behavior analysts or not too many that are there or that can get there. So sometimes I feel like there's a different state when you get outside of Route 495. And so what's in the Boston area and when you get to the western part of the state can look vastly different as well. But I've seen that change a lot over the last, say, 6 or 7 years. And there's a lot more coverage, and it's getting broader, and it still needs to continue to spread and get broader. But there's certainly pockets of need and that are underserved.
Sure. Yeah. I know you mentioned some of your work with behavior analysis companies and behavior analysts, and how, insurance was never part of the course curriculum. From your perspective, if you could share, a couple tidbits of information for the BCBA that is just sort of new to insurance or has been too scared to crack, to look online or to look at a book about insurance, what would be some real tips that you just wish behavior analysts knew that you think would help them either work better with insurance companies or help families work better with insurance companies?
First, I think they should just recognize the structural requirements and make sure they either have the infrastructure or they subcontract it out or get the resources. So it's not that they can't do it, but you can't do this half-baked, or else you'll just find yourself with not getting the reimbursements that you need. The other thing I think behavior analysts don't always inherently understand. I think partly because my impression is they tend to be a rule-based bunch and follow rules really well.
You got us pegged, yeah.
Is that when insurers might not approve completely an authorization and give what they sometimes call a partial approval, that's actually a denial. And so all of treatment is driven by medical necessity, but it's the behavior analyst who does the assessment and the evaluation is determining that, and an insurer might come back and say, well, based on this, instead of 20 hours a week, we are going to approve 15 hours or 10 hours. Well, they're actually not just partially approving something, and you have to take that. They're really denying 5 or 10 hours, and that's something that can be appealed. Mm-hmm. And in our experience, most of those appeals are successful, but very few of them get appealed. So many behavior analysts assume if that's what gets approved, that's what they can provide and cover, and they just have to figure out how to make the most impact they can. When really my advice would be sometimes you have to ask the insurer to deny those services and give you a formal denial and appeal that and get the hours that the patient needs.
Huh. That is a good tidbit. I could see why if someone in a suit comes and the insurance company says, nope, this is what we're going to give you, it would be very daunting to, oh well, I guess that's just how it goes. But that is good to know that is not the only course of action.
Yeah. So, as professionals, the patients you're dealing with, and you're doing the assessments, you're doing the treatment plans, what's needed to be effective, and sometimes you have to advocate for it a little bit hard.
Yeah. Amy, what are kind of the next big steps you think for either insurance reform or for getting more coverage to families, or for helping families with the efficiency of getting coverage? What are kind of the next big steps for autism and insurance?
Well, I'm not sure there's big steps. I mean, I'd say we're somewhere between the implementation and the enforcement phase. Mm-hmm. So I think it's ensuring quality. It's behavior analysts figuring out how to run sustainable business operations, with insurance reimbursement, and it's stabilizing and equalizing the balance of supply and demand, and just having enough well-trained behavior analysts to meet the needs of the population, which behavior analysts are increasing, but the need is increasing and the prevalence is still going up. So it's still going to be tough for a while. So I think it's kind of three-pronged. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to be vigilant because, on a national level, the forces that want to kind of change some of the underlying laws that provide access to healthcare coverage and insurance, could make this more challenging in the future as well. Mm-hmm. So that's going to require sort of continued vigilance, and it may require additional advocacy just to kind of make sure we don't actually lose any ground from what we have.
Excellent. That's a good point. Continuing to be vigilant, because who knows, who knows where things will change any given time, it seems.
Well, certainly, there's been a big backlash on the Affordable Care Act and healthcare reform in general, and some of the efforts to allow different ways to sell policies and different kinds of policies could result in people having coverage that I don't see it on the horizon right here in Massachusetts immediately, but there are these what are called stripped down policies, and I expect the first things that might be stripped out would be some of this kind of treatment. So that's what I worry about.
I don't know what treatment they would be giving if they're saying, well, you can't have ABA so much anymore, but here's something else. Yeah, that would sort of defeat a lot of the purpose of all the work everyone has done.
So that's what we're looking at.
All right.
I hate to end on such a Debbie Downer note, but
no, that's okay.
I would like to say if there's anybody listening who has questions and wants more information, this is a complex topic. So our center is easily accessible, on the web and by phone and by email. And if people want our website, I could just give people what that is.
Of course.
MassAIRC.org.
Amy, thank you so very much for having a late night interview. I hope it didn't keep you from doing something else fun.
My pleasure.
Well, again, Amy, thank you so much for your time. It was really, I love learning anything I can about insurance. So I really, really appreciate that you took the time to give me a little bit of background information, a little extra education for me.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you again so much to Amy for taking the time out of her very busy schedule to talk with us here at ABA Inside Track. We are so amazed at all of the work she has done, and we are so excited to have a resource like her and her organization here in our state. Hopefully, for those of you who are listening from other states or even other parts of the world, you have similar folks that you can count on to answer your questions about insurance, because like Amy said, I don't think any of us really took that class on in-depth insurance coverage when we were studying to sit for our exams. I certainly know I did not. I think I passed basic econ at one point, but that's about it. Thanks again so much to Amy, and thank you for listening. Her information for the AIRC is going to be in our show notes page and will be on our website as well as on our various social media places, so Twitter and on Facebook. If you liked our interview or if you have questions about the show that are not related to insurance, if you have insurance questions, you want to contact Amy. But if you have questions about the show or any feedback you'd like to give us, you can certainly leave us reviews or feedback on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you can download our show. We hope you subscribe to future episodes, or you can just email us directly at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed our break from the normal format for this special bonus episode. I know I got to do all the talking, so I had a lot of fun speaking with Amy. So I also hope that you had a good time listening to our interview. We'll be back next week with our preview episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!